And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
really,
man.
absolutely.
So you come from a family that I've seen described online. I don't know if
Mhm.
you describe it this way, but you come from a family that people describe it as Illuminati family.
Mhm.
Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a
Yeah.
lot of people are borrowing into. No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the
Really?
best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists,
Yeah.
right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to, you know.
Interesting. All right. So I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. Are what they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of uh, them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes, I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was. Yeah, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily. My blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff. And I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, you know? And that was brutal because then there's this. I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever.
Mm.
And it took me, there was a one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, you know, and it helped me to see that maybe I wasn't anathema, that maybe just because I have this seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not loving our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, you know, and that's what he offers to everyone.
Wow.
And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families. My family set up a base of operations. They're from the East Coast, the Reynolds family on one side. My mother's family, just for clarity, I've never exposed a lot of the side of things that were going on with, let me say it another way. The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. You know, like my great grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia.
Hmm.
And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book is far more powerful than the bank account because it's who you know can open doors to power anywhere
Hmm.
else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, you know, and they would make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the fall of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come and the daughter would be given to him and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, you know, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that. And I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation, and he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. That was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland, and they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of the Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child abuse. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered. abused, traumatized,
Jeez.
systemically so. But it's for behavioral modifications purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you're you give in.